Hello and welcome back to this episode of the Engage 8 podcast. I am Josh and my co-host Mike. Today we are going to cover the AFC and NFC West. We're going to do recaps by team, talk about how each team did this season and how they look going towards next season. But before that, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. We greatly appreciate it. We're trying to hit 100 subs. We also just dropped Answer 8, which is our new sports trivia show on this channel. It's the most recent video. You can go and click on that with the brown and gold thumbnail. We're going to be looking for guests to come on that show to compete with us on our teams in future episodes. So if you're interested in competing in sports trivia, shoot me a DM at JReedNBA, JReidNBA on Twitter, or comment on the video and I will reach out to you. But we can get started here with the AFC West, and the Kansas City Chiefs finished 15-2, first in the AFC West, lost the Super Bowl. They finished 15th in pass offense, 26th in rush offense, 19th in pass defense, and 10th in rush defense. Very odd season for the Chiefs overall. Regular season was very odd as they were not covering very often at all, but they continued to win and won 15 games. Their offense never really looked perfect, but they continued to win games, and it just felt like Mahomes would eventually click at some point in the playoffs with this offense. A big reason why the offense wasn't as great as it should have been is you see Rashee Rice go down early in the season. Hollywood barely plays until the end of the year. You see Kelsey's getting older and older, and we'll talk about Kelsey in a bit as he is not retiring. He is going to return for the last season of his contract, and that will probably be his last season. And of course, Isaiah Pacheco breaks his leg earlier on in the season. So all these injuries just really piled up for them. And although we've seen Mahomes do it before with lackluster casts when guys get hurt, he just was not able to fully click with this offense. But their defense was good enough to keep them in games, and Mahomes was good enough to win those games. Their run defense was great all year. Spags did a great job, one of the best coordinators of all time. They had a ton of injuries in the secondary, so their defense was up and down throughout the year. At the end of the day, though, the Eagles, who one of three teams they lost to, were just more talented and won that game at the end of the season strictly based on the fact that they were more talented. We saw the Eagles had like what was it, 22 or 24 starters from day one that played in the final game. And when you have one of the top 5 to 10 most talented rosters in the league and no one gets hurt, it's going to be tough for you to lose games in this league where a lot of teams are at least a little banged up and some of the best teams are fully dismantled by the end of the year. But regardless, the Chiefs, they go 17-3 in what was considered an off year for them, where they weren't great statistically, they weren't great on paper, but they still win 17 of 20 games. So what does that say about them? What does that say about Mahomes? I'm not worried about them going forward. I think they're going to find ways to win games regardless, and I don't think it's time to worry about the Chiefs until we at least see Andy Reid retire.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This Chiefs team, all season, they were really led by their defense. In the Super Bowl, that was on. They couldn't get it done against that Eagles offense, which was healthy, had so many weapons. They were fourth in total scoring defense. They only gave up 19.2 points per game. But offensively, they just didn't really have as good of a season as you would have expected with Mahomes. They didn't have the running back with Pacheco, like you said, breaking his leg. They brought in Kareem Hunt. He had 728 rushing yards on the season. He was solid. And then the receiving game, like you said, Rashee Rice goes down. That really hurt this team. They didn't have a 1,000-yard receiver this season. Travis Kelce was the closest, but still only 823 receiving yards. And then Ricky Xavier Worthy, he started to emerge towards the end of the season. He finished with 638 yards. They had a chance for 3 straight Super Bowls. Didn't get it done, obviously. They fell short to the Eagles, who just kind of manhandled them that game. The offensive line for the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, it was great during the season, but in that Super Bowl, they really couldn't get it done. The Eagles destroyed them. Trey Smith is a potential free agent he is a free agent that will probably leave this Chiefs team, so they're going to have to replace him. And they have a couple other guys, Nick Bolton, Justin Reed, Charles Omenihu, just a couple guys. Josh Uche, he wasn't as big, but just a lot of depth guys on this team, offensively and defensively. I mean, all the receivers outside of pretty much Worthy and Rashee Rice are going to be gone. Marquise Brown, Mecole Hardman, DeAndre Hopkins, Juju, Justin Watson. All those guys are going to be free agents, so it'll be interesting to see who they bring back. I don't think they had to put up. I think they only scored 30-plus points once or twice this season. Once was against the Bills. I think they did it maybe once during the season. Next season, I think they're going to have to change that. They're going to have to start scoring more. They can't continue to be this team that just really relies on their defense. I think you can win a lot of games like that, considering how good this defense is. And you have Patrick Mahomes; he's not going to turn the ball over. But in some of those big games, when you're going against a team like the Eagles, your offense has to be able to go down there and score a lot. And We just really didn't see that from this unit this season. I think this offense, they still have the weapons with Kelsey staying. He isn't as good as he used to be. He's getting older, but I think he's still a great tight end to have. Xavier Worthy can continue to take that step forward. He's been fantastic for this team, especially in that Super Bowl. You saw him have a huge game, and getting Rashee Rice back is going to be huge. He was the leading weapon for this offense before he got hurt, unfortunately. He still has some of those off the field stuff he's dealing with, so he misses the start of the season next year, but when he's back, I think Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice is going to be a great duo, and they're still going to be looking for a receiver to complement them, but they get those guys back, and like you said, they get Andy Reid back, so they're going to be a contender. And you have Patrick Mahomes, so you're really always going to be a contender.
Yeah, it's time to start dealing out those suspensions. JMO's officially clean. Time to pick on somebody else. NFL, Jordan Addison, Rashee Rice. Time to make it even and not just target one guy, Roger Goodell. But moving on here, Chargers 11 and 6, second in the AFC West, lost in the wild card round. They finished 19th in pass offense, 20th in rush offense, 7th in pass defense, and 14th in rush defense. I was pretty right about this team for the most part. I had them overachieving and finishing second in this division. Outside of an ending that created a lot of question marks at quarterback for them, the Chargers had a complete overachieving season. There were huge question marks about their receiving core and their running backs going into the year. Both ended up being solid. Their rookies and McConkey and Joe Alt both had great rookie years. Quentin Johnson got a lot better this year, which was huge. They picked him early last year, and he had a disappointing rookie season. He comes out this year and looks a lot better. They still probably need one or two more weapons to be elite, but still those weapons were a lot better than expected. We see J.K. Dobbins have a complete resurgence year. They were really, really good offensively when they could just run the hell out of the ball with him and just run a full run first offense, but the air was taken out of this offense once he got hurt late in the season. The defense was buzzing all year long. Pass rush was great, secondary was great, tough to pass on. It was overall a really, really good year for Jim Harbaugh. The biggest issue now for the Chargers, though, is you look at Justin Herbert's two playoff performances. He has a huge blown lead at Jacksonville a couple years ago, and then this year against a Texans team that he absolutely should have beat, he completely collapses, throws a ton of picks in the wild card round, and loses that game. I still believe he's a great quarterback, but some great players do really sometimes tend to struggle in big moments, and there's nothing you could really do about that. All you can do is continue to get to the playoffs, continue to give him that experience, and he's good enough where I think he'll eventually break through. So I still love the Chargers going forward. I'm not as low on Herbert as some people are after that game, but still, he no doubt has to perform better in the playoffs.
Absolutely has to perform better in the playoffs. That was an unacceptable performance. But overall, this season, the Chargers team making the playoffs was a huge success. Having guys like Lad McConkey emerge and be a 1,000-yard receiver, that was a success for them. So they had a lot of good things happen this season. Joe Alt developed very good for them. They have two great tackles. Maybe can get better on the interior offensive line, but having two cornerstone tackles for the future is going to be huge. And obviously, you have Jim Harbaugh coming in, and that is big for the culture and the offense mainly. He played a style of football. They like to run it, like to control the time of possession, limit turnovers, and they did that for pretty much all the regular season. It didn't work out in the playoffs, but they did that in the regular season. They're going to want to continue that going forward. J.K. Dobbins didn't get 1,000 yards this season, finishes with 905 yards. But going forward, if he can stay fully healthy, he did miss a couple games. I expect him to make it to 1,000 yards, and I think bringing in another running back next year to be next to J.K. Dobbins is going to be huge because we saw J.K. Dobbins get hurt, and this team really struggled to run the ball completely with any of the other guys, Gus Edwards, Kimani Vidal, Hassan Haskins. They really couldn't get it done. It was pretty much strictly J.K. Dobbins, so I expect them to bring in some depth there. And then defensively, the Chargers team was fantastic all around. Jesse Minter did a great job, best in the NFL in opponent's points per game. They had guys. Derwin James had a great season, an All-Pro season. Khalil Mack was very good this season. So I expect this defense to continue to be good moving forward. This team really just has to get Justin Herbert some weapons. Some of the receivers that this team had outside of Lad McConkey just couldn't get it done. Quentin Johnson was solid this season, did have a couple drops, but overall he was still solid for him. Joshua Palmer is a good just depth receiver, but outside of those two, and they're okay. They still need really a star. I think Lad McConkey can be that star, but I still think you need someone to go with him that is a little bit better than Quentin Johnson and Josh Palmer. They are losing a lot of depth guys on their defense, so they're going to have to look to replace them. Khalil Mack is going to be a free agent. We got Denzel Perriman Sante Samuel, Marcus May, Tony Jefferson, just some pretty good depth guys for him. J.K. Dobbins as well on the offensive side of the ball. So we'll see how they are able to replace those guys. They do have a decent amount of draft capital. So I expect them to really just continue to stack up on that depth defensively, get another running back. I think they should bring back J.K. Dobbins and get Justin Herbert some weapons. So I like this Chargers team moving forward with Harbaugh and Herbert together. I think they can be a great team. They just three interceptions in the regular season, and I think he had three in that one playoff game alone. Got to figure that out, but a great season nonetheless.
Okay, moving on here to the Denver Broncos at 10 and 7, third in the AFC West, lost in the wild card round as well. They finished 21st in pass offense, 17th in rush offense, 20th in pass defense, and 5th in rush defense. This season could not have been more of a W for the Broncos. Bo Nix was a very questionable pick at 12th in the draft last season, but ended up having a phenomenal rookie year. 3,775 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, 12 interceptions for him. I was right about whoever plays quarterback in this situation having pretty solid weapons, and that ended up being true. Offensive line was solid. Mims and Sutton are great receivers, and this is a pretty solid situation for a quarterback to be in. Outside of the fact that Sean Payton is has the longest play calls of all time, and rookies sometimes don't tend to respond well to that kind of coaching, but he did in this case. I said the defense would be on the bad end of mid. That was obviously not the case. The run defense was elite for them this year. Pat Surtain, of course, wins Defensive Player of the Year. Riley Moss had a solid year until the end. Bonito and Zach Allen both had great years. So this defense was very, very talented. This team wasn't even expected to compete for the playoffs, but they end up making it and losing in round one. Sean Payton is getting in his bag now. I think this team is on the up and up. You have a great head coach, a solid young quarterback, great weapons around him, an offensive line to protect him, and a talented defense. So I think this is a team that a couple of years down the road could rock even the same roster if they can maintain a lot of these guys, and they're just going to continue to progress, continue to get better, and they're going to be in the mix for a long time. I think this team has a bright future as long as they have Sean Payton and Bo Nix around them.
Yeah, I also think this team has a bright future. Bo Nix was great in his rookie season, but I almost put the Broncos on a little bit of a same tier as like the Commanders, where I think that really going into the season they didn't have expectations at all. So you go in and you make the playoffs, you just massively exceed expectations. And now next year you're going to have expectations to be good, and you have to go out there and perform and prove that you are this good football team. Bo Nix had a great rookie season. I didn't expect him to be this good, but he was fantastic. 29 passing touchdowns to 12 interceptions, threw for 3,775 passing yards. He was great. Sean Payton called his shot, said that Bo Nix might be the best quarterback in the draft, went out and did it, and it worked out for this Broncos team, led them to the playoffs. Nix was fantastic, and probably, I'd say definitely a top three rookie quarterback this season, no matter what. Defensively, they were just better than the offense. This defense was fantastic. They led the NFL in total sacks with 63. The next closest was the Ravens with 54. They were great in defensive points per game. Vance Joseph is the defensive coordinator. He was great with that unit. Third best defense versus the run. Just a fantastic season. They were third best in defensive opponents' points per game. Need to continue that going forward. You have a lot of momentum going into next season with Bo Nix and this defense. Pat Surtain winning Defensive Player of the Year. They have a lot looking for them. I think they need to bring in a running back that can help improve this offense. Javonte Williams, he was solid, but he's a solid running back, but only 513 yards. He was splitting a lot with Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime. I think you need to bring in an alpha, get a good running game in there for Bo Nix, and I think that could be a difference maker for this offense, and that could really put them over the hump. They're not really losing too many guys on either side of the ball. Cody Barton on defense, maybe DJ Jones on defense, but outside of that, Javonte Williams will be a free agent, but I think you can move on from him and bring in a different, more top tier running back, and that could be huge for this Broncos offense moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one spot where they're definitely lacking because they have the O line that can block for a running back. So you just got to bring a running back in there that's highly talented that can take over a game for you and take a little bit of pressure off Bo Nix, who is going to be trying to avoid that sophomore slump at quarterback. But
100%.
last team here for this division, the Raiders, 4 and 13, last in the AFC West, missed the playoffs, of course. 13th in pass offense, 32nd in rush offense, 16th in pass defense, and 12th in pass or rush defense, excuse me. As expected, a bad season for the Raiders. Defense was pretty highly underrated, but they had no real chance with how bad this offense was. They were just constantly on the field. It didn't matter who came in at running back. No one had any success for this offense, and they just couldn't run for shit. Each game, you just saw 12 carries, 16 yards, 12 carries, 20 yards over and over and over. They just could not get any run game going. The O line wasn't horrible, but the three QBs took a combined 49 sacks, which would be good for seventh most in the league if that was one starter. Really hard for them to get a quarterback going too, with Minshew getting hurt. O'Connell kept getting hurt and coming back in. O'Connell's a solid quarterback in my opinion, but the Raiders have to go draft somebody. I think he can be a great backup or even a great bridge quarterback for another team. But I think it's time for the Raiders to go get a super talented young quarterback and just start over, excuse me, with Pete Carroll. Brock Bowers, despite having bad quarterbacks, was one of the best players in football this year. They fired AP after one season, short-lived dream for him. I know it was his dream to become the Raiders head coach. That unfortunately didn't last too long for him, but they bring in Pete Carroll after a year off. I respect Pete a ton as a head coach. Obviously, I like this hire for them, despite him being a little bit on the older side, and by a little bit on the older side, I mean the oldest coach in the NFL. But still, he's experienced. He's been around the block. He's going to get a young quarterback. He's been solid with young quarterbacks in his past. And I think that's going to be great for them. And that's assuming that the Raiders take a quarterback, which at this point, I'm going to assume that because all signs seem to be pointing that we're going to see more than two quarterbacks go high in this draft.
Yeah, they're going to have to bring in a quarterback for Pete Carroll and this team, but this season for the Raiders was a very disappointing one. Had a little bit more expectations than this. Really, the main issue for this team was you go into the season with two quarterbacks, and usually people say when you have two quarterbacks, you really have none, and that's what this team dealt with all season. Even had three quarterbacks at the time. We saw Gardner Minshew play, Aiden O'Connell play, and Desmond Ritter. Out of the three, I'd say AOC is probably the best and probably had the best season out of the three. He threw for 1,600 yards, 8 touchdowns, 4 picks. Gardner Minshew threw for 2,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, 10 picks. Ritter, 458 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Just too many quarterbacks to really have a successful season, and none of them are really standing out. I think Aiden O'Connell could be a great backup in this league, but I don't know if he's really a starter for a playoff contending team. Just a lot of different drama went around this team with Max Crosby maybe wanting to get traded. That hopefully in the offseason, that's got to be something that they got to take care of. Either move him, keep him, but make your decision final and let him know that. I love the move of bringing in Pete Carroll. I think he can maybe bring in a quarterback with him, help him develop, have him help develop that quarterback, or maybe you go out in free agency and bring in Russell Wilson, a guy who Pete Carroll has great knowledge with
I don't hate
for
that at
this
all.
offense. Yeah, I mean they have weapons already, some decent weapons. Obviously, they have Brock Bowers, rookie of the year maybe for this division. Should have been closer in the race in the NFL, but he had 1,194 yards. He had 112 receptions, broke a lot of rookie records and tight end records. He was great, and he's going to be great moving forward. Jacoby Myers was a 1,000 yard receiver. I think he's a very good wide receiver. You need more depth there, and then really the main thing outside of quarterback for this team is you gotta fix the rushing attack for them. All season we talked about it. They had the worst rushing attack in the NFL. Alexander Madison finished as their leading rusher with 420 yards. Then your guy Amir Abdullah finishes with 311 yards. Just cannot have that. You got to fix that in the offseason. Only 79.8 rushing yards per game. That was by far the worst in the NFL. That's got to be something that you fix, especially if you get a young quarterback. You cannot have that abysmal of a run game. Defensively, they were bottom 10 in points per game. They need to fix a little things. They are losing a decent amount of guys defensively, specifically, I mean, Robert Spillane, Devine Diablo, Nate Hobbs. I think those are guys you can replace, bring in some better talent, and maybe some addition by subtraction there. So they're going to have a busy offseason. They have a lot of moves to make at different big positions. And we talked about Zamir White before the season being a guy who can maybe break out for them. He finished with only 183 rushing yards.
Yeah,
So,
my God.
and Sincere McCormick was a decent running back for him in his handful of games that he played for him, but he did suffer a season-ending injury. But
Yeah.
yeah, need a better rushing attack.
Yeah, I love the idea of Russ coming to the Raiders. I liked Russ to the Raiders last season as a possible option, and I kind of forgot about it being an option this year, but it's also another option for them. Reunion with Pete Carroll. I don't know how that relationship is, but the only thing I'd be worried about there is the offensive line. We saw when the Steelers' offensive line wasn't playing great at times this year. We kind of saw Russ go into a little bit of a shell and struggle a bit. But I'm still team young quarterback for them, but I like Russ as an option.
Yeah, I'm team young quarterback, but I think Russ. Honestly, I think both is a great option. Bringing in a young quarterback, a Jalen Miller type, and Russ, and put those two together and let them move forward.
You keep saying Milrow.
Uh,
Milrow's not going in the top 10. It
I'm not.
can't
I'm not
happen.
saying. I mean, I don't think they have to take one in the top
Oh,
10.
you're saying they take one later on. Yeah, I mean that I could see.
Take one
Yeah,
later on.
yeah, I could see that for sure. Okay, we'll move on now to our division awards here for the AFC West. For Offensive Rookie of the Year, beginning of the year, I had Joe Alt. Joe Alt had a great year, so there's nothing against him, but I have to go with Lad McConkey here. He was phenomenal. He finishes with 200 yards in the last game of the season in that wild card game, especially in that back half of the year. He completely broke out. He's wide receiver one in LA now. I think he's going to continue to be that. We see Justin Herbert loves him as a weapon, and I like them going forward.
Um, for mine, for offensive rookie of the year, I went with Lad McConkey before the season, but I'm going to switch that to Brock Bowers. He was should have been close. I think he finished top three in rookie of the year, but he was great for this Raiders offense. Broke multiple records and finished with over 1,000 receiving yards. So I got Brock Bowers as my rookie of the year for this division.
Okay, Defensive Rookie of the Year, just bare bones here for this division. I left it blank for a while. Maybe I'm forgetting someone, possibly. But beginning of the year, I had Junior Colson because nobody went in the first or 2 rounds, I think, of the draft defensively for this division. I guess, gonna stay with him because he was okay when he played this year. But to my knowledge, no defensive rookies had a massive impact in this division. So I'm just gonna have to stick with him. I considered giving this just blank and adding another offensive rookie of the year in, but I guess I'll go with Junior Colson.
Yeah, honestly, this division is really bare bones for that defensive rookie of the year. I think I picked Junior Colson before the season, and I guess I'll just stick with that. But really, no top guys that stand out. I mean, I mentioned Tommy Eichenberg. It looks like he finished with like 13 tackles. So
Yeah.
if we're giving out 13 tackles for defensive rookie of the year, I guess.
Okay. Offensive player of the year. The reason I went with Ladd for offensive rookie of the year is I'm going with Brock Bowers for offensive player of the year. He was just absolutely dominant. Finishes third in catches with 112, eighth in yards with almost 1,200 yards. He was so good. He's a dominant weapon. I think outside of maybe, I mean, he was better than Kelsey this year, but outside of, I don't know, I'd probably say he might be the best weapon in this entire division right now. So I'm gonna go with Brock Bowers. He had a great year. There was 2 years ago before he was entering the draft. Everyone was talking about him being this generational tight end. He got hurt, and then before the draft, he's still going in the first round, but not viewed as highly as he was 2 years ago. And then he comes out here in his rookie season and absolutely dominates. So I'm gonna go with Brock Bowers for offensive player of the year.
Yeah, that makes sense because I was very confused why you didn't take him for
Yeah.
it. But for offensive player of the year, I'm gonna go with Justin Herbert. He was great this season. Had a little bit of a bounce back year. 23 touchdowns, 3 picks. Obviously, that didn't transfer into the playoffs, but he was great in the regular season. Led this Chargers team to a playoff appearance. So I'm going to go with Justin Herbert as my offensive player of the year.
Okay, defensive player of the year. Another one I wasn't really sure I wanted to go with this one, so I went with Chris Jones. He's just Chris Jones is Chris Jones, continuously solid season after solid season for him. He's one of the most dominant, if not the most dominant interior defensive lineman in football right now. He's a guy that you put in the game and he's going to be a game wrecker. Offensive coordinators have to plan, offensive line coaches have to plan for him specifically before each and every game. And he's a guy that can absolutely wreck a game on your defense. So I went with Chris Jones for defensive player of the year.
For defensive player of the year, I went with the guy who won it in the entire NFL, Pat Surtain. He was fantastic for this Broncos defense. Led them all around on that. They had a great defensive year. He led them, so I'm going with Pat Surtain and for my defensive player of the year.
Yeah, he's my MVP. Pat
Mm.
Surtain of this division. Like you said, he wins DPOY, the best corner in football this year, established himself as that. He's a guy that doesn't even get targeted because of how good he is on the outside, and he can absolutely shut down any wide receiver one in football right now. So I had to go with him. There was no player in this division that I felt had a better season than him.
For MVP, I still went with Patrick Mahomes. I think I picked that preseason. Yes, and I still went with that. Didn't have his great best season really statistically, but he led this team to a fantastic record, led them all the way to the Super Bowl, and he still is, if you take it by name value, most valuable. He still is the most valuable player probably in the NFL. So I took Patrick Mahomes for my MVP.
Yeah, I forgot to say who I took for the other ones, but Travis Kelce I had oh boy beginning of the year, switched it to Brock Bowers, different tight end. Deep boy, Max Crosby went to Chris Jones, and then MVP I went from Patrick Mahomes to Pat Surtain. So, all right. We can move on now to the NFC West. We'll start with the Los Angeles Rams, who finished 10-7, won the NFC West, and lost in the divisional round to the future Super Bowl champions Philadelphia Eagles. They finished ninth in pass offense, 23rd in rush offense, 11th in pass defense, and 28th in rush defense. Very similar season to last year for the Rams. They dealt with a ton of injuries in the first few weeks, got themselves in a 1-4 hole very early. They lost Puka, they lost their O line. I think maybe Cup missed a game or two. I can't remember. Hit on a ton of rookies though. Braden Fisk, Jared Verse were both phenomenal. Great second season for Puka when he played, but he was hurt for a while. Kyron Williams was their lead back all year. They were best in the games where they completely played through him. We saw this Rams team has been a pass offense since Todd Gurley left, turned into a rushing offense at times this year where they just ran the hell out of the ball with Kyron Williams. The offensive line was very, very banged up early, but later on in the season, they got to full strength and we saw them go on a run and make it to the divisional round. Right now, the biggest thing is there's a lot of drama about Matt Stafford going somewhere else in the offseason here. I can't stress it enough. I think it's imperative that the Rams maintain him at quarterback. He's so talented. He plays through injury, even though he's older, and he still gets it done. And when he's at full strength, he's one of the best quarterbacks in football. You're going to be losing Cooper Kupp. They're going to need a weapon to replace him. I think this would be absolutely detrimental to this team going forward if they lose Stafford and Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, I don't really get the trying to move on from Stafford. I don't know if they're just trying to get off that horse before it starts crashing, but it really just makes no sense to me to move on from Stafford after the season he had. He was great. 3,762 yards, 20 touchdowns, 8 picks, led this team to a division title and the playoffs. He was great. They had a lot of injuries early in the season. Offensive line was banged up really bad. We saw Puka Nacua get banged up early, then Cooper Kupp, and just it was a rough start to the season, but they really recovered, and they were led by their leader Matt Stafford. He kept them in the season. They stayed the course. We saw Kyron Williams really have a great season, finished with 1,300 rushing yards and 14 touchdowns. Does still have a bit of a fumbling issue, but still nonetheless great season. He was the lead back. And then in the receiving game, you get once they got Puka Nacua back, he was great. Doesn't get 1,000 yards this season, but only played in 11 games. Finishes with 990 yards, only 3 touchdowns. Cooper Kupp finishes with 710 yards. We really saw towards the end of the season him start to fall off a little bit. Wasn't really getting the targets as all, but offensively this team did shift. They went to a more of a rushing attack with Kyron Williams, less passing attack, and when they were passing, they were really targeting Puka Nacua. And just moving on from Matt Stafford, it just doesn't make sense. We saw this team play the Eagles very close, almost beat them, had a chance to go and get a touch on that last possession to potentially tie it. Probably played the Eagles the best in the playoffs, than closest than any other team. I get moving on from Cooper Kupp. You can really make Nacua the main guy, start to open things up, but it makes no sense to move on from Matt Stafford. Uh, Going forward, the defense was solid, wasn't great. I think that's something they still need to improve a little bit. And if they lose Cooper Kupp, you need to bring in a wide receiver too to have another guy. They're in a decent cap situation. They are going to lose some guys. We see they got some free agents: Joe Newcomb, Alaric Jackson. Defensively, really not too many guys. Like Hello Witherspoon, he was a great corner for him this season, but they're not missing too many guys. I think they can bring the guys back that they need to, and I can see this team, if they wanted to make another couple big free agent moves and bring in some guys instead of deciding to tear it down. So we'll see what they do, but winning the division, making the playoffs, they were great this season and not too far off from going to the NFC Championship.
Okay, we'll move on here to the Seattle Seahawks, who finished 10-7, second in the NFC West, and missed the playoffs. Sixth in passing offense, 28th in rushing offense, 13th in passing defense, and 16th in rushing defense. The potential this team had this year was off the charts, but a few fatal things just killed them. First off, they finished 10-7 despite everything, which is very impressive. The offensive line was absolutely horrible, one of the worst, if not the worst, in football. Gave Geno no chance at times this year. Whenever they played a bad pass rush, they succeeded because their weapons are so good and Geno can get it out fast enough. But whenever they were playing a guy who they couldn't block, it was a tough day for them. You see, speaking of weapons, JSN has a breakout year this year. They're sticking with Geno, and I agree, but they have to improve the offensive line, or it's a bad move for them to stick with him with a bad offensive line. This defense had a chance to be very solid, but injuries just killed them throughout. Reed, Murphy, Williams, Mafe, Woolen, Witherspoon, Love, Bryant, Hall, they're all very solid and very young players. I think this defense has a chance to get back into those Legion of Boom days and really become a dominant unit defensively. This team could easily be a 13 win team with a healthier defense and a slightly better offensive line. I think next year, if they even have a mid offensive line, it's going to get them in the playoffs very easily. They should have probably made it this year. They still finished 10-7. I'm very high on the Seahawks going forward, especially this defensive unit.
Yeah, I'm very high on the Seahawks moving forward as well. We've seen in the offseason, I've loved the move they made early. They fired Ryan Grubb. He did a good job this season. He got the ball to JSN a lot. Geno Smith had a good season, but a lot of turnovers. And I think bringing in a guy like Clint Kubiak can be huge for this offense. They need to get a better rushing attack. That is something that head coach Mike McDonald was stressing. Kenneth Walker was banged up a lot this season, only played in 12 games, 153 carries, finishes with 573 yards. It's going to be big for him to go into next season and be healthy for 17 games, go out and have a good season. He has the potential to be a top 5, top 10 running back, but he's got to be able to stay on the field and get those carries to put himself in that conversation. He's one of my favorite players in the NFL, so I really want him out there playing good football. And next season's going to be a big season for that. Offensively, like I said, JSN broke out. He was big. He kind of proved that he can be a top 10 receiver in football. Finishes with 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns on 100 receptions. I think going forward, he can just continue to improve those numbers. It looks like Geno Smith will be the quarterback next year, so they have a connection now, and I hope they continue to have a better season. Geno Smith with Clint Kubiak, I think he can be great. Just needs to limit those turnovers, 15 interceptions. A lot of them were on the plus side of the 50 for him, so he's got to be better there. And then, like you said, the defense for this team was not bad. They were in the better half of yards per game, only giving up about, or points per game, only giving up about 21.6 points per game. They were top 10 in sacks with 45. They were much improved, and I expect them to continue to get better with Mike McDonald as their head coach. He's one of the best defensive minds in the entire sport. So I have a lot of expectations going forward. They're not losing too many guys, really not losing anyone on the offensive side of the ball of importance, losing a couple of guys on defense, but I think with bringing in Clint Kubiak, that can really help move this offense forward, and Mike McDonald continue to get some of his guys that he wants on defense, and this defense can be very, very good.
Okay, moving on here to the Cardinals. They finished 8-9, third in the NFC West, and of course missed the playoffs. They finished 18th in passing offense, 7th in rushing offense, 15th in passing defense, and 20th in rushing defense. I said this team would be mid, but not great, and that's basically what they were. There was a point in the season where they were sitting at 6-4 going into a bye week, and we talked about this bye week could kill their momentum. I'm worried about them after the bye week, and we saw they did lose 3 straight after that. James Conner was great all year for them. He was a bell cow. He's getting older, but he's still year after year great for whatever team he's playing with. Marvin Harrison Jr., pretty underwhelming season, but outside of Trey McBride, they don't really have anybody else to guard on the offensive end for the Cardinals when it comes to the receiving game. So he was forced to do a lot more than he really had to. But at the same time, you look at a guy like Malik Neighbors, who had much worse quarterback play, just about the same weapons, even though I think the Giants might have a little bit more weapons than the Cardinals do. But still, Neighbors is able to perform and have a phenomenal season. We see Marvin Harrison be a little bit disappointing. I'm still very confident he's going to be a great receiver in this league. He has all the tools to be a great receiver. I just think his situation around him needs to improve a little bit better. They finished with a plus 21 point differential, but just under 500. So they were winning some games by a lot and losing some games by a little, which just sometimes happens in this league. Big decision the Cardinals have to make, though, is Kyler Murray. I still think he's a great quarterback, but this was a pretty disappointing season for him. You expected a lot better. Gannon survives at head coach, but he's going to need to be above 500 to keep his job next year. I can't see them going under 500 and going third or fourth in the West again and keeping his job. I just can't see that happening. Defense at points was really solid, but got ran all over from time to time. There were games where they just got completely ran over and bullied in the front, and they just cannot let that happen. Like I said, though, this is about what I expected from this team going into this season. Outside of Kyler not being great, I didn't see that as a possibility, but That is unfortunately what happened for them. Going forward for next season for them, you're going to want to see that defense improve up front. You're going to want to see those weapons improve on the outside, and you're going to need to see more production from Kyler Murray, or it could be a complete clean house for the Cardinals.
Yeah, they had an improved season, but it was still slightly disappointing for them. I like Kyler a lot. I think he's very talented. I'm not 100% sure he can win at this level, but we've seen it before. I think he still has the chance to do that. He has games where he looks like a top five quarterback in the NFL, and then he has games where he just falls apart, and maybe his size is a part of that, of the inconsistencies. I feel like part of the issue this season that he had was this Cardinals team has with winning is I think they need Kyler Murray to utilize his legs more. He had 572 rushing yards on the season, which is his second highest rushing yards in his career in a season. But he did play in 17 games. He hadn't played in 17 games in all of those seasons. In 2020, the Cardinals were very good. They were one of the better teams in this division. He had 819 receiving yards, maybe his best. He had 819 rushing yards. That was maybe his best season. When he brought that dual threat ability all season, it was game changing for this offense. The next season, it did go down to about 500 yards, and they made the playoffs. He played in all 17 games, but that season they had the addition of D Hop that really set this offense apart. I think him getting back to that 800 yards is going to be huge for him. Get it in there. I think they need to run him like the Commanders do with Jaden Daniels, like the Ravens do with Lamar. I think you need to get him that many rushing yards for him to have a winning season and be an elite quarterback at this level. That's just something that he can do better than most quarterbacks is run the ball, and I think they just need to exploit that more. James Conner had a solid season on the ground, 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. He's getting older, but he's still giving them very good production. And then the other thing I'd love to see from this team more next year is get the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. You have to. I know he has the potential to be a wide receiver, a top five wide receiver in the NFL. He can be one of the best in the NFL. And only getting him 885 yards in his rookie season, 8 touchdowns after all that hype, just is a really disappointing rookie season from him. Trey McBride was great. He finally got a touchdown, so good for him this season, and finishes with 1,100 yards. He's a top five tight end probably in this league. Finishes with 111 receptions. He was great. But really moving forward, I think they need to get Kyler Murray more rushing yards. They need to get Marvin Harrison the ball. Def Free agent wise, they're not losing too many top level guys at all. I think they'll be all right. I think it's again another team that has a little bit of addition by subtraction. They need to bring in some guys that can give them a lot of production, but just a good season. But you got to be able to win these games. And you mentioned Jonathan Gannon. I think this defense hasn't really improved that much since he's been there. If you don't really see that improvement next season at all, that would be his third or fourth season as the head coach of the Cardinals. You need to see some improvement there for him to really be a worthy head coach, and we'll see if he gets it done, but I'm not really sure if he brings too much to winning for this team.
Okay, last team here for this recap. The 49ers, they finished 6 and 11, last in the NFC West and missed the playoffs. They finished third in passing offense, 11th in rushing offense, fourth in passing defense, and 18th in rushing defense. This was the classic 49ers Super Bowl or ass ways here. Yes, they had a horrible season, but if you look at their losses, all but three were to playoff teams, and of those teams that did not make the playoffs, two of them were 8 and 9, and one of them were 10 and 7. So they didn't really have any horrible losses this year. They did lose 7 of 8 to end the season, which was brutal for them. They lose Ayuk and CMC for basically the entire year. That's wide receiver one and RB1 for them right after you pay Ayuk. So it's hard to recover from that. The O line was pretty banged up throughout the year. So we kind of got to see what we wanted to see from Purdy. We want to see, can he compete in a perfect situation? Can he win games without a perfect situation? Excuse me. And what we saw was very disappointing. Purdy was not able to succeed when he didn't have the perfect situation around him offensively, and then defensively the secondary injuries added up. Their pass defense rank was pretty deceiving at fourth because teams were able to run on them late in games. Their kicking was brutal. Jake Moody might have to kick rocks for them. He just had a horrible year. We saw Debo Samuel even take it out on the long snapper. But speaking of Debo, they're not going to have Debo next year. They're going to need Ayuk to step up and be wide receiver one. He's paid to be wide receiver one, so he has to act like it, coming off of, I believe, an ACL, and CMC's missed basically the entire year. So hopefully he'll be healthy next year. I like them to compete again next year and be right back in the mix. I love Shanahan. I think Purdy's a good quarterback when he has a great situation around him, and the situation's going to improve. The only way I see this going bad for them again next year is if everyone gets hurt again, but the law of averages in the NFL says that they're probably not going to have as many injuries as they had this year. So, although they had a horrible year, when you look at it at a more detailed lens, it wasn't as bad as it looks on paper, and I think they're going to be a lot better next season.
Yeah, still maybe though the most one of the most disappointing teams this season, especially in this division or in this recap. Ton of injuries, like you said. They lost a team MVP, CMC, for most of the season. Just had so many injuries they had to deal with, but there's really no excuses. Still, you had to go out and perform. Brock Purdy was solid, threw for 20 touchdowns and 12 picks, 3,864 yards. Does have to limit the turnovers a little bit. Like you said, they had that Super Bowl or bust almost how the 49ers work. But coming off that losing in the Super Bowl, we've seen a lot of teams have that next season where they just kind of fall apart. We saw it with the Eagles, saw it with the Niners, and we see it here. Um, the defense statistically was pretty solid. They had some top guys that were good against the pass, solid versus the run, but they were bottom in NFL, bottom fourth worst in the NFL in points per game, giving up 25.6 points per game. So just all around, they have to really figure some things out. Have to stay healthy, like you said. That's going to be huge. And you still got George Kittle. He had 1,000 yard season. Losing Ayuk right after you pay him, that did really hurt. Probably hurt the morale of this team. Jawan Jennings emerged this season though for them as a solid receiver. Deebo Samuel was not really great this season at all. Finishes with only 670 receiving yards. He requests a trade, so most likely he will be gone, and you can kind of get rid of that. Ricky Pearsall, late in the season, started to emerge as a solid weapon for him, so I don't really think they have to make too many moves in getting Purdy more weapons. I think it's just kind of fix a little bit of the O line, get the defense, and just get and stay healthy. Maybe get a new training staff. Who knows? But Fred Warner was good. Moving forward, like you said, Debo may be gone. They did make a coaching change. They promoted Clay Kubiak to offensive coordinator. They hadn't had an offensive coordinator since Mike McDaniel. He's been doing it all himself. Shanahan has been basically the offensive coordinator and the head coach, so that could be some pressure off of him. I think he's a top five coach in the game. He wins a lot of games. He didn't last season, but he's still a great coach. He's a great offensive coach. Has always had good offenses, and I think him and Brock Purdy will get on the same page next season and have a good season going forward. They had the thing that really no other contender in the NFL had, where they had Brock Purdy on such a small contract. They're going to have to pay him if they want to keep him here soon, so they're not going to have that advantage like they have had over other teams these last couple of years. So we'll see how their roster construction is moving forward. It's going to be different. They're losing a ton of guys in the offseason. Charvarius Ward, who's been a great corner for him, he's most likely gone. Deshaun Gibson, Tualoa, Hufunga, just all around. There's a lot of guys. Devondre Campbell, Dre Greenlaw, a lot of guys. Javon Hargrave. They're gonna potentially be losing a lot of guys. So it's gonna be a big offseason and a lot of turnover for this 49ers team.
Okay, we'll move on to our division awards then for the NFC West. Offensive Rookie of the Year. At the beginning of the year, I had Marvin Harrison Jr., and despite not having a great year, I'm going to stick with him because I think he's better than the other offensive rookies in this division. Although he had, like we said, a very disappointing season, I still think he's looking out for the future, and I still think he was probably the best offensive rookie in this division this year.
Yeah, I'm gonna probably stick with him as well for offensive rookie of the year. It's kind of like him versus Ricky Pearsall, and
Yeah,
uh,
right.
I'm gonna stick with Marvin Harrison Jr. Disappointing seasons. I hope next year's way better for him, but I'm gonna stick with Marvin Harrison Jr. for my offensive rookie of the year.
Okay, for defensive rookie of the year, I had Byron Murphy at the beginning of the year. I'm going to switch to Braden Fisk, all rookie first team. He benefits from there not being a clear depoy in the West, as I will get to that a little bit later. But all rookie first team, like I said, for him, he was great on the interior defensive line for him, for the Rams, I should say, and turned their defense from a unit that was a little bit questionable going into the year, and then they hit on a couple draft picks, and it became a strength of their team. So I'm going with Braden Fisk for defensive rookie of the year.
For defensive rookie of the year, I picked Jared Verse before the season, and I think I'm gonna stick with that. I'll stick with Jared Verse. He was great for this Rams defense. They had a solid pass rush all around. They had guys, Kobe Bryant, Byron Young. They had solid guys. So not Kobe Bryant, Kobe Turner.
Yeah, Kobe
I'm pretty
Bryant's in this
sure.
division.
Yes, Kobe Bryant's in this division. Uh, Wrong LA team, but yeah, I'm gonna stick with Jared Verse as my D Roy.
Okay, for my offensive player of the year, I went with Trey McBride. He didn't get into the end zone until the end of the year this year, but he still finishes with 111 catches and 1,100 receiving yards. He was great for them. He was better than Marvin Harrison was for this offense at times this year. I think he's one of the better tight ends in football. He was being drafted super high in fantasy before the year, and it seemed a little bit questionable, but it ended up working out for them. He just needs to find the end zone a little bit more. I think he will next year. I think he's going to emerge as a top 6, 7 tight end in the league if he's not there already.
Yeah, for Opoy going into the season, I had Matt Stafford, but I think I'm going to change that to Trey McBride as well. He was fantastic. Like I said, 111 receptions for him, was a top tight end in the NFL. I'm going to give an honorable mention to JSN. He was great this season with the Seahawks, really emerged, but I still think one more. I think next year we're probably talking about JSN for Offensive Player of the Year, and then Kyron Williams as well as an honorable mention.
Yeah, and I had, by the way, I had CMC as Offensive Player of the Year, and obviously he didn't play enough for that, so that's why I went with Trey McBride. Depoy, the reason I went with Braden Fisk for D-Roy is I do have Jared Verse for Depoy. He had a hell of a rookie year. I could have gone with Bosa. I could have gone with Fred Warner, but Verse just impressed me so much. He was able to take this defense and completely reshape it to fit his likeness, and teams had to go and game plan for him. And he turned this defense alone into an elite unit. While Bosa and Warner are so talented, but this Niners defense was really nothing to be afraid of, especially towards the end of the year with all those injuries, where Jared Verse was able to take a team that might have been less talented than the Niners defensively and turn them into a better defense because of how good he was. So I went with Jared Verse for Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, and he was Defensive Rookie of the Year for the NFL as well.
Yes, yes. I
Um,
also had Nick Bosa to start the year. I could have gone with Nick Bosa again, but I like Jared
yeah,
Verse.
for Defensive Player of the Year, I had Fred Warner going into the season, and I am going to stick with that. Although this defense wasn't as good as they were supposed to be, and this team wasn't as good as they were supposed to be, Fred Warner still had a great season, 131 tackles, 2 interceptions. I think he's still one of the best linebackers in the NFL, and I think he was good enough this season to win this the Defensive Player of the Year. He's this defense has to change moving forward, but he's got my Defensive Player of the Year.
Okay, for MVP, I went with JSN. Beginning of the year, I had Matt Stafford, but I went with JSN here. 1,100 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns, 100 catches for him. Complete breakout year. And he's on an offense where there's a ton of other talent, and he was able to stand out over DK and able to stand out over Tyler Lockett, who has the second most all purpose yards since 2015. He's been great this year for the Seahawks. He had a bit of a disappointing year last year, but he's showing improvement. I think next year, like you said, I think he's going to be in the running for one of the better offensive players in football. I love JSN. I think he had a great year this year, and he's a big reason why the Seahawks were able to overcome some of their biggest weaknesses, especially with injuries and the offensive line.
Yeah, he was fantastic. For my MVP, I went with Matt Stafford. He kept his team together no matter what. Had a solid season passing the football, led them to the playoffs. They win the division, and he's getting older, but he still is one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. Threw for a lot of yards. Just really led this team to the playoffs is the main thing, and I got Matt Stafford as my MVP.
Okay, that will about do it for this episode of the Engage A podcast. We'll be back next week to do the AFC and NFC South recaps, and then the week after that, we will do AFC and NFC North recaps. Thank you all for making it this far in the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit all the links in our description for social media, TikTok, Spotify, and all that good stuff. And we'll see everybody in the next one.